Number 1. The Tri-Lobed Disc of Prince Sabu. In 1936, the British Egyptologist Walter Bryan Emery was digging through a mud brick tomb at Saqqara, north of the famous Step Pyramid, when his team lifted out an object that did not belong in any textbook. It was a disc of dark stone, about 61 centimeters across and just over 10 centimeters tall, carved with 3 thin curved lobes that fold inward toward a raised hub in the center. The tomb belonged to a man named Sabu, a son of the first dynasty pharaoh Ajib, which dates the object to around 3000 BC. That makes it more than 5,000 years old. Picture the moment for yourself. You are clearing the dust of 50 centuries, and out comes a shape that looks less like a bowl and more like a fan, or a wheel, or a part from a machine that should not exist yet. The disc was carried to the Egyptian Museum in Cairo and catalogued as Object JE 71295. For long stretches, it sat in storage rather than on proud display, which is exactly the kind of detail that makes people lean forward and whisper. The stone itself is a brittle metasiltstone, often loosely called schist, and that brittleness is the heart of the puzzle. The mainstream reading is calm and simple. Egyptologists like Cyril Aldred treated it as an ornamental vessel, perhaps an incense burner or a stand for offerings, one of tens of thousands of finely worked stone bowls the early dynasties produced. Then came the other reading. Alternative authors looked at those 3 curved lobes and saw a flywheel, or a fan, or the housing for some lost mechanism. The trouble is the physics. The lobes are thin and the stone is fragile. Spin this object at any real speed, and the stress would crack it apart at the curves. Engineers who examined it concluded it could not have borne a mechanical load. 3 theories sit side by side. The mainstream view calls it a beautiful but ordinary vessel. The craft view calls it a virtuoso showpiece, proof that First Dynasty artisans could shape stone with impossible delicacy. And the fringe view calls it a fossil of forgotten technology. What no one disputes is that the disc is unique. Nothing else quite like it has ever been excavated. So if it is just a bowl, why does it stand completely alone? Number 2. The Quimbaya Aeroplanes. Travel from the Egyptian desert to the river valleys of central Colombia and to a civilization called the Quimbaya, who worked gold between roughly 300 and 1000 AD. They left behind small figurines cast from tumbaga, an alloy of gold and copper, and a handful of those figurines have launched 1,000 arguments. They look to modern eyes uncannily like aircraft. A pointed nose, swept back wings, and most strikingly, an upright tail fin standing vertical at the back. They are tiny, only 2 to 7 centimeters long, worn as pendants on a cord. These pieces belong to the treasure of the Quimbaya, a group of 122 objects unearthed around 1890 from 2 tombs near the Cauca River. In 1893, the Colombian government gave the treasure to Spain as a diplomatic gift, and most of it now sits in the Museo de America in Madrid, far from the land that made it. That foreign housing is part of why the objects feel, to some, like hidden evidence. The mainstream identification is grounded in local nature. Archaeologists see stylized insects, flying fish, birds, bats, and amphibians, animals the Quimbaya knew well. The flat shapes in this reading are fish fins or insect wings rendered in gold. But there is one feature that the animal explanation struggles with, and you should sit with it honestly. No fish and no insect has an upright vertical tail fin like the one on these figurines. That single detail is what keeps the debate alive. In 1994, 2 German aviation enthusiasts, Algund Enboom and Peter Belting, built scaled radio-controlled models based on the figurines and flew them successfully. Skeptics were quick to point out that the models needed added stabilizers and a propulsion system that the gold originals simply do not have. So weigh the 3 theories. The first is pareidolia, the human habit of seeing familiar shapes where none are intended, dressing up stylized fauna as jets. The second reads them as shamanic or transformation imagery, creatures of flight in a spiritual sense. The third, the fringe claim associated with writers like Erich von Däniken, says they record the memory of real flying machines. The metallurgy that made them, lost wax casting and depletion gilding, was itself sophisticated, and we can replicate it today. What we cannot do is ask the Quimbaya what they meant, because they left no writing. And if these are only fish, why does the tail point straight up to the sky? Number 3. The Lycurgus Cup. Now to an object that genuinely contains advanced science, hidden inside the glass itself. The Lycurgus Cup is a Roman drinking vessel from the 4th century AD, about 16 centimeters tall, held today in the British Museum. Its carved outer surface shows King Lycurgus of Thrace tangled and trapped in vines. But the carving is not why scientists study it. Under ordinary reflected light, the cup glows a deep jade green. Shine a light through it from behind, and it transforms, blazing a rich blood red. The same cup, two completely different colors, depending only on where the light comes from. For centuries, no one could explain it. The answer arrived under the electron microscope. Suspended throughout the glass are colloidal nanoparticles of gold and silver, roughly 70 nanometers across, in a ratio of about 7 parts silver to 3 parts gold, with a trace of copper. These metal specks interact with light at the scale of individual wavelengths, a phenomenon modern physicists call a plasmonic effect. In plain terms, the Romans made a piece of nanotechnology. British Museum analysis in the 1990s confirmed the particle content, and in 2013 researchers at the University of Illinois cited the cup as direct inspiration for modern plasmonic sensors that could detect disease in a single drop of fluid. Here is the catch, and it is the crux of our whole theme. No Roman text records how to make dichroic glass. The Lycurgus Cup is the only complete Roman example to survive intact. Almost certainly, the effect was an accident. The gold and silver may have entered the melt from contaminated tools or recycled materials, and a single batch happened to produce the magic. But the distribution of particles is remarkably even, which is exactly what makes it hard to dismiss as pure luck. Deliberate or accidental, the recipe was never written down, and the technique vanished completely. Consider the 3 readings. The first is the lucky accident, a one-time fluke in the furnace. The second is a guarded workshop secret, a recipe held by a few craftsmen that died with them when their workshop closed. The third, the fringe view, treats it as a fragment of inherited advanced knowledge from an older source. The cup is also a cage cup, wrapped in an open-work glass shell connected by tiny bridges, a cold-working feat that is itself extraordinary. The Romans, it turns out, could touch the nanoscale. They just could not tell anyone how. And if glass could hide such a secret by accident, what about a humble clay jar? Number 4. The Baghdad Battery. The object is unremarkable to look at. A small clay pot, about 13 centimeters tall, containing a copper cylinder, and inside that, an iron rod, all held in place by a plug of bitumen. It was described around 1938 by Wilhelm Koenig, then director of the Baghdad Antiquities Administration. Koenig dated it to the Parthian period, somewhere between 250 BC and 224 AD, though some scholars push it later, into the Sasanian era, between 224 and 650 AD. And Koenig made a claim that turned a pot into a legend. He suggested it was a battery. The logic is not absurd. Fill the copper cylinder with an acidic liquid, vinegar, or grape juice, and you have the basic recipe for a galvanic cell. Modern replicas built exactly this way produce between half a volt and 2 volts. In 2005, the television team behind Mythbusters wired several replicas in series and generated a few volts, enough to suggest the device could, in principle, deliver a current. Koenig even proposed a use, electroplating thin layers of gold onto silver. But step back and look at what is missing. No wires were found, no connected objects, no plated items, nothing that an electrical device would need to actually do anything. No text from anywhere in the ancient Near East mentions electricity, electroplating, or batteries. And Parthian goldwork is far better explained by fire gilding, a known technique that uses mercury, not current. The mainstream interpretation is therefore much quieter. The pot is a storage jar, the metal cylinder a holder for a rolled scroll or sacred papyrus, and the bitumen simply a seal. Corrosion inside suggests an acidic agent was once present, but decaying organic matter, like a rotting scroll, would also leave acid traces. So the three theories line up. The first calls it a scroll or relic container, ordinary and religious. The second allows that it might be a real but isolated galvanic discovery, an accident never developed into anything. The third, the fringe favorite, holds it up as proof of an electrical ancient world. Sadly, several of these artifacts were lost when the National Museum of Iraq was looted in 2003, and Koenig's original notes were incomplete, which clouds the dating even further. The Baghdad Battery remains the most cited candidate for ancient electricity, and also the most stubbornly unprovable. It may light a bulb in a replica, but it has never lit the historical record. Number 5. The Nimrud Lens. In 1850, the pioneering archaeologist Austin Henry Layard was excavating the Assyrian city of Nimrud, in what is now northern Iraq, when he recovered a small oval of rock crystal. It measures under 4 centimeters across and about 5 millimeters thick, and one of its faces has been ground and polished into a gentle curve. Layard had found a lens, made in roughly 750 BC, nearly 2,000 years before anyone is supposed to have invented eyeglasses. It now rests in the British Museum, often labeled simply the Layard lens. What can it do? Its focal length is about 11.5 centimeters, and it magnifies by roughly 3 times. The great physicist David Brewster examined it in the 1850s and judged that it could serve as a magnifying glass, or even concentrate sunlight to start a fire. Then the claim escalated. The Italian scholar Giovanni Pettinato proposed that the lens was part of an Assyrian telescope, and that this might explain the startling accuracy of Assyrian astronomical records, which tracked planets and predicted celestial events with real precision. The mainstream response is firm. The lens is crudely ground, its surface imperfect, making it a poor optical instrument by any deliberate standard. Most Assyriologists read it not as a tool, but as a decorative inlay, perhaps set into a piece of furniture or jewelry, since rock crystal luxury objects were common across Mesopotamia. No lens grinding workshop and no other optical equipment has ever been found at Nimrud. And while Assyrian astronomy was indeed advanced, it was advanced mathematically, built on generations of careful naked eye observation and record keeping, with no text anywhere mentioning a lens or a viewing tube. The 3 readings follow naturally. The first calls it a simple decorative inlay that happens to be lens-shaped. The second grants it a practical role as a magnifier, perhaps used by craftsmen to carve the era's astonishingly detailed cylinder seals, which carry images so fine they almost demand magnification to cut. The third, the speculative view, imagines a lost tradition of Assyrian optics, even astronomy through a primitive telescope, a tradition that left no other trace. The problem with that last idea is that it cannot be tested. Without the instruments to support it, the telescope remains a guess. But the lens is real, and it sat in Assyrian hands a full 2 millennia early. The question of what they did with it is a message we still cannot read, much like the next object, where the writing itself defeats us. Number 6. The Phaistos Disc. On the island of Crete, in 1908, the Italian archaeologist Luigi Pernier was excavating the Minoan palace of Phaistos when he uncovered a disc of fired clay about 16 centimeters wide. Both of its faces are covered with symbols arranged in a spiral, 241 tokens in all, grouped by short lines into 61 clusters that look like words. There are 45 distinct signs. And here is the detail that makes specialists catch their breath. Each symbol was not carved by hand, but stamped into the wet clay using individual punches, one stamp per sign, reused across the disc. That makes the Phaistos Disc the earliest known example of movable type printing, predating Gutenberg by roughly 3,000 years. Think about what that implies. If you carve a set of reusable stamps, you intend to make more than one thing. Someone expected to produce many such texts, yet not a single other stamped disc has ever been found. The technology appears once, fully formed, and then disappears. The disc sits today in the Heraklion Archaeological Museum, catalogued as AE 1358, and the museum restricts invasive testing, a caution that some read as deliberately withholding access. The deeper mystery is that no one can read it. The script matches no known writing system, not the Minoan Linear A, not the later Linear B that was famously decoded in the 1950s. John Chadwick, who helped crack Linear B, judged the disc likely undecipherable for a brutal reason. With only one substantial inscription to work from, there is simply not enough material for the statistical attack that breaks ancient scripts. The signs themselves show people, fish, plants, tools, and a distinctive plumed head. Even the direction of reading, inward toward the center or outward toward the rim, is debated. So the interpretations multiply. The first reads it as a religious or ritual text. The scholar Gareth Owens, for instance, argues the recurring sign groups invoke a goddess. The second treats it as something administrative, a calendar, a list of names, or an index. The third, the speculative reading, sees imported or coded knowledge from elsewhere. A nearby find, the Arcalocori axe, shares a few of the signs, hinting that this was once part of a wider writing tradition that has otherwise vanished entirely. In 2008, a scholar named Jerome Eisenberg argued the disc was a modern forgery, but most experts rejected the claim. The Phaistos Disc is genuine. It is the first printing press, and it holds a message pressed permanently into clay that we still cannot decode. Some lost knowledge is hidden. This kind is simply unreadable, like a scroll made not of clay, but of metal. Number 7. The Copper Scroll. Among the roughly 900 Dead Sea Scrolls, almost all written on parchment or papyrus, there is exactly one made of metal. It is called the Copper Scroll, designated 3Q15, and it was found in 1952 in Cave 3 near Qumran. It was engraved on 2 sheets of nearly pure copper, dated to somewhere between 50 and 100 AD, in a rough colloquial Hebrew, and its contents are unlike anything else in the entire collection. It is not scripture, not prayer, not law. It is a list of 64 locations where enormous quantities of gold, silver, and temple treasure are said to be hidden. By the time it was found, the copper had oxidized into a brittle, solid roll that could not be opened. So in 1955 and 56, an engineer named H. Wright Baker, working in Manchester, carefully sawed the scroll into 23 curved strips so the text could finally be read. What the readers found only deepened the mystery. The totals described, if taken literally, would amount to dozens of tons of precious metal, an amount so vast that scholars immediately split over whether the scroll records real wealth or a kind of legend. The debate has never settled. John Marco Allegro, one of the original scroll scholars, championed the literal reading and even mounted treasure hunts in the 1960s. He found nothing. Part of the reason is that the place names are obscure, sometimes coded, and most can no longer be matched to any modern location. The scroll tells you the treasure lies beneath a specific cistern or step or tomb, but the landmarks are gone. The Copper Scroll is held at the Jordan Museum in Amman, separate from most of the other scrolls, and access for re-examination has historically been tightly controlled, which only sharpens its reputation as guarded knowledge. So consider the readings. The first takes it literally, as a genuine inventory of the Second Temple treasure, hidden away before the Romans destroyed Jerusalem in 70 AD. The second sees it as symbolic, or even fictional, a list of tithes, ritual deposits, or simple folklore. The third, the most evocative, treats the deliberate choice of copper as the point. Whoever made it wanted this information to survive fire, flood, and conquest, choosing the one material that would outlast catastrophe. The unusual units it uses, talents, and a measure called the kakarine, complicate every attempt to estimate the quantities. No treasure from the list has ever been verifiably recovered. It is a literal map to lost knowledge, written to endure, that we can read word by word and still cannot follow, much like a certain book that has defeated every codebreaker who ever opened it. Number 8. The Voynich Manuscript. It is a book of about 240 pages, made of vellum, that is, treated calfskin, and it is written in a language no one on earth can read. It takes its name from Wilfrid Voynich, the Polish book dealer who purchased it in 1912. For a long time, even its age was a guess, until radiocarbon dating at the University of Arizona in 2009 fixed the vellum to between 1404 and 1438, the early 15th century. The book today lives at Yale University's Beinecke Rare Book and Manuscript Library, cataloged as MS-408, kept under restricted, controlled conditions that most researchers only ever experience as digital scans. Open it, and you find a flowing script of 20 to 30 distinct characters, written confidently from left to right by a practiced hand. The pages are organized by their illustrations into sections that scholars label herbal, astronomical, balneological, that is, concerning bathing, cosmological, pharmaceutical, and recipes. The herbal section shows plants. And here's the first strangeness. Many of those plants match no known species on the planet. The astronomical pages show stars and circular diagrams. The bathing pages show small figures in green pools connected by tubes. Now the central fact. Despite more than a century of effort, no one has deciphered a single confirmed word. The codebreakers William and Elizabeth Friedman, who broke major military ciphers in both world wars, spent years on it and failed. And yet, the text is not random. Statistical analysis shows it follows Zipf's law, the mathematical pattern that real languages obey, which means it behaves like either a genuine language or an extraordinarily sophisticated cipher. In 2019, a researcher named Gerard Cheshire announced he had solved it as a Proto-Romance language, and linguists almost universally rejected the claim. An artificial intelligence study in 2018 suggested the underlying language might be Hebrew, and that too remains unconfirmed. The theories cover every possibility. The first says it encodes a real language or a working herbal manual in cipher. The second says it is an elaborate hoax and points to the near total absence of corrections, which is strange for any working text. But the vellum is genuinely from the 15th century, so any hoax would have been contemporary and very expensive to fake. The third, the romantic view, holds that it preserves lost esoteric knowledge, a body of learning deliberately encoded. Its history runs through the Holy Roman Emperor Rudolph II, who reputedly paid 600 gold ducats for it, and a 17th century letter ties it to the scholar Athanasius Kircher, who could not read it either. It is the most studied unreadable book in the world, a manuscript that plainly holds information no one can extract. Which brings us, at last, to the one artifact that proves lost. Advanced knowledge is not fantasy, but fact. Number 9. The Antikythera Mechanism. In 1901, sponge divers working a Roman-era shipwreck off the small Greek island of Antikythera brought up a lump of corroded bronze. It looked like nothing, a green, calcified mass. It is, in fact, the most important object on this entire list, because it ends the argument about whether the ancient world could hold knowledge we later lost. It is a geared mechanical computer, built around 150 to 100 BC, though some analyses based on its eclipse cycles push the design back to about 205 BC. It survives in 82 fragments, kept in the National Archaeological Museum in Athens. Inside that case, originally about 34 centimeters tall, were at least 30 interlocking bronze gears, the largest about 14 centimeters across, and carrying 223 teeth. The device modeled the heavens. A hand crank drove the gears, and dials displayed the position of the sun, the moon, and very likely all 5 planets known to antiquity, along with the phases of the moon. To reproduce the moon's varying speed across the sky, the builders used an epicyclic or differential gear train, the earliest known use of such a mechanism anywhere in history. This was not a toy. It was precision engineering. How do we know all this? Because the corrosion hid the gears. The breakthroughs came from imaging. Derek DeSolla Price began decoding it in the 1950s through the 1970s, and from 2005 onward, the Antikythera Mechanism research project used high-resolution X-ray computed tomography to see inside the fragments without destroying them. They read more than 3,400 inscribed characters in everyday Greek that function as a user's manual. The front dial carried the zodiac and an Egyptian calendar. The back dials tracked the 19-year Metonic cycle and the Saros cycle used to predict eclipses, that 223 tooth gear encoding the eclipse cycle directly. It even named the 4-year cycle of the Panhellenic Games, including the Olympics. Here's the part that should stop you cold. Nothing of comparable mechanical complexity appears again in the human record until the astronomical clocks of 14th century Europe, roughly 1400 years later. The knowledge to build this simply vanished. Researchers connect it to the school of the astronomer Hipparchus, or to the engineers of Rhodes, and in 2021, a team at University College London proposed a full reconstruction showing a complete planetarium, a model cosmos, displayed on its face. The 3 readings here are not really fringe at all. It was a teaching instrument, or an astrologer's and navigator's tool, or a luxury commission from a workshop whose methods died with it. Whatever it was, the Antikythera Mechanism is the proof, in solid bronze, that civilizations can build something brilliant, and then forget how, exactly as a Renaissance admiral may have forgotten the maps he copied. Number 10. The Piri Reis Map. In 1513, the Ottoman admiral and cartographer Piri Reis drew a map of the world on gazelle skin. Only a fragment survives, the Western Third, and it was rediscovered by accident in 1929 during renovations at the Topkapı Palace in Istanbul. The surviving piece measures about 90 by 63 centimeters and shows the coast of Western Africa, the eastern coast of South America, and a stretch of southern land that has fueled debate for nearly a century. In his own marginal notes, Piri Reis explained how he made it. He compiled it from about 20 older source maps, including, he wrote, one that had belonged to Christopher Columbus. The map's fame rests on that southern coastline. Some interpreters look at it and see Antarctica, drawn as it would appear without its ice sheet. That is a remarkable claim, because Antarctica was not officially sighted by anyone until 1820, more than 300 years after the map was drawn. In 1966, the historian Charles Hapgood published maps of the ancient sea kings, arguing that Piri Reis must have copied charts originally made by a lost advanced civilization that mapped the southern continent before it froze. The mainstream cartographers have a far more grounded answer, and it is worth understanding. The southern coast, in their reading, is simply the coast of South America itself, bent eastward to fit the edge of the parchment, a common distortion in maps of that era. The map is drawn in the standard Portolan style of the time, with rum lines radiating from compass roses to guide navigation. Its accuracy for the parts of South America it does show is genuinely impressive, but it matches the Portuguese and Spanish charts that Ottoman intelligence could plausibly have gathered in the 21 years since Columbus first sailed. The Air Force letters that Hapgood cited as support have been widely reinterpreted and do not actually endorse a lost civilization. So the three readings close our list. The first is sober Renaissance synthesis, an admiral combining the best charts available and distorting a coast to fit his page. The second points to the old cartographic tradition of Terra Australis, a hypothetical southern land that mapmakers drew long before anyone reached it. The third, the fringe favorite, insists it preserves the survey of a vanished seafaring people. But notice where the real mystery lives. Piri Reis was a documented, brilliant navigator whose Book of the Sea is a genuine masterwork. The true lost knowledge here is not secret Antarctica. It is the roughly 20 source maps he used, almost all of which no longer exist. The map is a window onto a library that is gone, which is the thread that ties all 10 of these objects together. Look back across the 10, and a pattern emerges that explains why people reach so quickly for the word band. The Tri-Lobed disc spent years in a Cairo back room. The Lycurgus Cup sat in storage for decades before it became a star exhibit. The Voynich Manuscript lives behind the controlled glass of a Yale vault. The Phaistos Disc is shielded from invasive testing. From the outside, these all look like the same thing, knowledge being kept from you. But the reality is usually more ordinary and worth untangling. Most of what looks like suppression is conservation. Ancient glass is fragile and light-sensitive. A brittle 5,000-year-old stone disc cannot be handled casually. A unique clay disc cannot be drilled into for testing without risking the very thing you are trying to study. Museums restrict access to protect objects, not to hide them. And some restriction is about security. Several Baghdad Battery artifacts were lost when the National Museum of Iraq was looted in 2003, a permanent reminder of what happens when guardrails come down. Other factors feed the suspicion. When the Quimbaya gold sits in Madrid rather than Colombia, and the copper scroll sits in Aman, apart from the other Dead Sea Scrolls, the geography itself breeds a sense that something has been taken and concealed. Early excavation records did not help. Koenig's notes on the Baghdad Battery were incomplete, leaving real gaps that the imagination rushes to fill. The internet then amplifies all of it into a single phrase: they do not want you to see this. The honest frustration underneath is fair. Many of these artifacts really were understudied for decades. But understudied is not the same as forbidden, and conservation is not the same as censorship. There are really two different kinds of lost knowledge tangled together in this list, and separating them sharpens the whole picture. The first kind is lost technique, know-how that lived in people's hands. The dichroic glass of the Lycurgus Cup, the epicyclic gearing of the Antikythera Mechanism, the depletion gilding of the Quimbaya goldsmiths. These are processes. They were performed, not always written down, and when the small circle of artisans who knew them died or scattered, the skill evaporated. The second kind is lost text, knowledge that was recorded but can no longer be read. The script of the Voynich Manuscript, the stamped signs of the Phaistos Disc, the coded geography of the copper scroll. Here the information physically survives. We can hold it, scan it, count its symbols, and still extract nothing, because the key, the language, the landmarks are gone. Why does a technique vanish? Usually because it lived in a single guild with no written recipe, and the chain of teaching from master to apprentice broke. Why does a script vanish? Because too few samples survive, the language behind it died, or perhaps only one scribe ever truly used it. The Antikythera Mechanism is the most haunting case, because it sits in both categories at once. Its makers actually inscribed a manual on it, more than 3,000 characters of explanation, and even that was not enough to keep the gearing alive through the centuries. It shows a hard truth. Writing knowledge down preserves the what, the declarative facts. It does not automatically preserve the how, the living skill. We can rebuild the gears today and reread the manual. We still cannot read a word of Voynich. Both are loss in different shapes. It is easy to dwell on what we cannot read, so it is worth pausing on how much modern tools have clawed back. The single greatest example is the Antikythera Mechanism. For decades, it was an inscrutable lump, until X-ray computed tomography let researchers see straight through the corrosion and map every surviving tooth without touching the metal. The device's functions were recovered not by force, but by light. The same revolution touched the others. Surface and trace analysis under the electron microscope revealed the gold and silver nanoparticles in the Lycurgus Cup, turning a magic trick into measurable physics. Radiocarbon dating pinned the Voynich vellum to a 30-year window in the early 15th century, ending centuries of speculation about its age. Multispectral imaging, which photographs objects across wavelengths the eye cannot see, has recovered faded and damaged text on the Dead Sea Scrolls that was effectively invisible. Three-dimensional scanning has been proposed for both the Tri-Lobed disc and the Phaistos Disc, capturing every contour for study without a single drill hole. Reconstruction has done the rest. Michael Wright and later the University College London team turned 82 corroded fragments into working models that actually compute. Aerodynamic testing put the Quimbaya figurines and their flight claim to a fair physical trial. Statistical linguistics measured the deep structure of Voynich and proved it is not random noise. But every one of these tools shares the same limit, and it is the limit of our whole story. Imaging reveals shape. It reveals structure, age, and composition. It does not reveal meaning. We can now see the Voynich script in perfect resolution and remain exactly as unable to read it. Each instrument narrows the mystery. None of them so far closes it. It is worth asking, fairly, why the wilder explanations hold such power, because they are not born from nothing. The modern genre largely began in 1968, when Erich von Däniken published Chariots of the Gods and proposed that ancient artifacts recorded contact with visitors from the sky. Charles Hapgood's Lost Sea Kings supplied the framework behind the Piri Reis claims. These ideas spread because they answer a real hunger to find wonder and secret history in the human past. Part of the pull is simple psychology. Pareidolia, the brain's tendency to find familiar patterns, makes a stylized goldfish look like a fighter jet and a curved stone bowl look like a machine part. And there is a more subtle trap. Because one object on this list, the Antikythera Mechanism, is a genuine, proven case of lost advanced technology, its credibility leaks onto the weaker claims. If the Greeks built a computer, people reason, then surely the Quimbaya built aircraft. But that is not how evidence works. Each claim has to stand on its own. The fringe stumbles where it ignores the physics. The flying replicas of the Quimbaya figurines needed propellers and stabilizers the originals never had. The ice-free Antarctica reading of the Piri Reis Map requires ignoring the map's own projection distortions and labels. Yet it would be arrogant to dismiss every unorthodox question, because sometimes the fringe asks something the mainstream wrongly waved away. The idea of ancient optics once sounded absurd, and the Nimrud Lens is a real ground crystal that forces the question to stay open. The healthy path is the narrow one, holding on to curiosity while refusing to abandon evidence. We do not know is an honest and exciting answer. They are hiding it is usually neither. Step back from all 10 objects and notice what they truly have in common. Each one is a survivor. The Tri-Lobed disc outlived the first dynasty that made it. The Antikythera Mechanism outlived the Hellenistic workshops that understood it. The copper scroll outlived the people who buried whatever it describes. These artifacts are the small, hard fragments left behind after something much larger, a craft, a library, a living tradition, was lost. And in almost every case, the thing that did the banning was not a secret council. It was time, fire, conquest, and forgetting. That reframes the whole question. The copper scroll was engraved on metal precisely because someone wanted it to survive catastrophe, a quiet, desperate wish to be remembered. The Antikythera Mechanism teaches the hardest lesson of all, that advanced does not mean permanent, that a civilization can reach a brilliant height and still let the knowledge slip through its fingers within a few generations. When you imagine everything that was lost alongside these objects, the scrolls that burned, the artisans who took their recipes to the grave, the scribes who were the last to read a script, the survivors become almost unbearably precious. So treat these 10 not as answers, but as questions, still open, still waiting. The unreadable ones, the Voynich Manuscript and the Phaistos Disc, may yet speak, as imaging improves and as artificial intelligence keeps hunting for the pattern that finally fits. Your curiosity is not a small thing in this. The reason these objects are studied at all is that people refused to stop wondering about them. Knowledge is fragile. It has been lost before, in deserts and shipwrecks and looted museums, and it can be lost again. The best honor we can pay these survivors is to keep asking what they know, and to take far better care of what we still have.